The crystal chandelier above table 12 trembled as Marcus Blackwell's fist struck the mahogany surface, causing the Waterford wine glasses to sing a discordant note that cut through the gentle hum of evening conversation at Bella Vista. The sound pierced through the restaurant like a blade through silk, and every patron within earshot turned to witness the spectacle unfolding in the corner booth. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Marcus snarled, his voice carrying the entitled edge of someone accustomed to having his every whim catered to without question. His Armani suit, pressed to perfection, seemed to strain against his inflated chest as he leaned forward, pointing an accusatory finger at the small woman standing beside his table. "I've been coming to this establishment for 3 years, and I demand the respect I deserve as a valued customer." Elena Martinez stood perfectly still, her posture straight, despite the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders like an invisible burden. Her uniform, a simple black dress with a white apron, bore the subtle stains of a long shift, yet she carried herself with a dignity that seemed to radiate from somewhere deep within her core. Her dark eyes, framed by laugh lines earned through years of genuine smiles, remained steady as they met his furious glare. In her hands, she held the leather check presenter containing his bill, her knuckles white from gripping it perhaps a bit too tightly. The restaurant around them seemed to hold its collective breath. If you're enjoying this story of standing up to entitled behavior, it took me hours to research and write. Please hit that like button and let me know in the comments if you've ever faced a similar situation. Bella Vista had been a cornerstone of the downtown district for over 2 decades, its warm amber lighting and exposed brick walls creating an atmosphere that felt both elegant and inviting. Tonight, however, that carefully cultivated ambiance felt fragile, as if it might shatter at any moment under the weight of Marcus's escalating demands. "Sir," Elena said, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had navigated countless difficult situations, "I understand your concern, but our pricing policy applies to all guests equally. The meal you ordered, the dry-aged ribeye with truffle butter, the lobster bisque, and the bottle of Caymus Cabernet comes to exactly what's listed on our menu." Marcus's companion, a blonde woman whose designer handbag probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She'd been silent throughout the meal, occasionally glancing at her phone, but now her discomfort was palpable. "Marcus," she whispered, tugging gently at his sleeve, "maybe we should just—" "No, Brittany," he snapped, not bothering to look at her. "This is about principle. I spend thousands of dollars here every month entertaining clients. The least this place can do is show some appreciation for my loyalty with a simple discount. 20%. That's not unreasonable." Elena's eyes flickered momentarily toward the kitchen, where she could see the concerned faces of her staff peering through the pass-through window. Carlos, the head chef, was wiping his hands on his apron with quick, nervous movements. Maria, one of the newer servers, looked ready to intervene, her own sense of justice clearly stirred by the scene unfolding before them. Near the window, a young man nervously adjusted his tie while his girlfriend admired the engagement ring he'd just slipped onto her finger. These were the moments Elena treasured most, the real, honest celebrations of life that her restaurant had the privilege of hosting. But Marcus Blackwell seemed oblivious to the sacred nature of these moments. His world consisted of quarterly reports, board meetings, and the constant pursuit of leverage over others. He was the type of man who measured his worth by his ability to bend others to his will, and Elena's quiet resistance was clearly infuriating him. "Do you know who I am?" Marcus's voice rose another octave, causing several nearby diners to openly stare now. "I'm the Regional Vice President of Acquisitions for Meridian Holdings. We own half the commercial real estate in this district. With one phone call, I could make life very difficult for this little establishment of yours." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a doused candle, acrid and unmistakable. Elena felt something shift inside her chest. Not fear, but a different emotion entirely. This story gets even more intense. If you want to see how it ends, please share this video and subscribe for more stories about people who refuse to stand down when it matters most. Behind the bar, Roberto set down his glass and watched protectively. Bella Vista had been Elena's dream, just scribbled on napkins and sketched out in notebook margins during her breaks from her previous job. He'd watched her pour everything she had into this place, seen her work 18-hour days to make it succeed, witnessed her tears of frustration and joy in equal measure. The leather check presenter in Elena's hands contained more than just a bill. It held the weight of every sacrifice she'd made, every dream she'd chased, every moment of doubt she'd overcome. The numbers on that piece of paper represented not just a meal, but the carefully calculated cost of running a business that employed 23 people, supported local farmers and suppliers, and had become a genuine cornerstone of the community. "I'm aware of your company, Mr. Blackwell," Elena replied, her voice remaining steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. "Meridian Holdings has quite a reputation in this city." Marcus smiled then, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. He clearly interpreted her words as capitulation, as acknowledgement of his power over her small world. "Then you understand why it would be in everyone's best interest to work with me rather than against me. 20% off tonight's bill, and we can consider this a misunderstanding." The engagement ring at the window table caught the light and threw tiny rainbows across the wall. The anniversary couple shared a quiet laugh over their dessert. A family at table 9 was teaching their young daughter how to twirl spaghetti properly, their gentle encouragement creating a bubble of warmth in the increasingly tense atmosphere. How many obstacles she'd overcome, how many sleepless nights she'd endured to create something beautiful and lasting. They saw only the surface, a dedicated waitress serving their meals with care and attention. But Elena saw everything. She saw the stack of invoices in her office upstairs, each one representing a relationship with a vendor who trusted her to pay fairly and on time. She saw the schedule posted in the kitchen, carefully crafted to ensure every team member got the hours they needed to support their families. She saw the framed reviews on her office wall, words from customers who'd chosen Bella Vista for their most important moments, because they trusted it to deliver something special. Marcus was still talking, his voice taking on that particular tone of someone who believed victory was within reach. "I'm not trying to be difficult here. I'm simply asking for the kind of treatment that any reasonable establishment would provide to a customer of my caliber. Surely you understand good business sense." Elena's fingers traced the edge of the check presenter, feeling the worn leather that had been handled thousands of times by hundreds of servers over the years. Each exchange represented a moment of trust between the restaurant and its guests, a simple transaction elevated by the care and attention lavished on every detail. The kitchen doors swung open and Carlos emerged, ostensibly to check on Table 8's order, but clearly positioning himself within earshot of the confrontation. His presence was subtle but protective, a reminder that Elena wasn't alone in this moment. Behind him, the rest of the kitchen staff continued their work, but their movements had taken on a more deliberate quality, as if they were all holding their breath. Roberto moved closer to the bar's edge, his weathered hands resting on the polished wood surface. His eyes met Elena's briefly, and in that glance was a lifetime of shared understanding. He knew, perhaps better than anyone, what this moment meant to her. He'd been there through all of it, the planning stages, the construction chaos, the first uncertain months when every customer felt like a miracle. The young couple by the window was now taking selfies, their joy radiating outward in gentle waves that seemed to push back against the negativity emanating from table 12. The anniversary couple had ordered a second bottle of wine and were deep in conversation, probably sharing memories that spanned decades. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile, the human connections that gave meaning to the work Elena did every day. Marcus's impatience was growing more pronounced by the second. His leg bounced under the table, his fingers drummed against the surface, and his eyes kept darting toward the exit, as if calculating how quickly he could escape if things didn't go his way. But he wasn't ready to leave, not yet, not without getting what he felt he deserved. "Look," he said, his voice taking on that falsely reasonable tone, "I'm not trying to be difficult here. I'm simply asking for the kind of treatment that any reasonable establishment would provide to a customer of my caliber. Surely you understand good business sense." Elena's fingers traced the edge of the check presenter, feeling the worn leather that had been handled thousands of times by hundreds of servers over the years. Each exchange represented a moment of trust between the restaurant and its guests, a simple transaction elevated by the care and attention lavished on every detail. The kitchen doors swung open, and Carlos emerged, ostensibly to check on Table 8's order, but clearly positioning himself within earshot of the confrontation. His presence was subtle, but protective, a reminder that Elena wasn't alone in this moment. Behind him, the rest of the kitchen staff continued their work, but their movements had taken on a more deliberate quality, as if they were all holding their breath. Roberto moved closer to the bar's edge, his weathered hands resting on the polished wood surface. His eyes met Elena's briefly, and in that glance was a lifetime of shared understanding. He knew, perhaps better than anyone, what this moment meant to her. He'd been there through all of it. The planning stages, the construction chaos, the first uncertain months when every customer felt like a miracle. The young couple by the window was now taking selfies, their joy radiating outward in gentle waves that seemed to push back against the negativity emanating from Table 12. The anniversary couple had ordered a second bottle of wine and were deep in conversation, probably sharing memories that spanned decades. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile, the human connections that gave meaning to the work Elena did every day. Marcus's impatience was growing more pronounced by the second. His leg bounced under the table, his fingers drummed against the surface, and his eyes kept darting toward the exit, as if calculating how quickly he could escape if things didn't go his way. But he wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Not without getting what he felt he deserved. "Look," he said, his voice taking on that falsely reasonable tone, "I'm not trying to be difficult here. I'm simply asking for the kind of treatment that any reasonable establishment would provide to a customer of my caliber. Surely you understand good business sense." Elena lifted her gaze from the check presenter and looked directly at Marcus. In her expression was something he couldn't quite identify, not defiance exactly, but something deeper and more complex. It was the look of someone who had seen enough of the world to understand what truly mattered, who had fought real battles and emerged with their values intact. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, her voice carrying a quality that hadn't been there before, something that made several nearby diners turn their heads, sensing that the dynamic in the room was about to shift dramatically. "I appreciate your years of patronage at Bella Vista. This restaurant has always been built on the principle that every guest deserves the same excellent service and fair treatment regardless of their background or position." The chandelier above them continued its gentle sway, catching the light and casting dancing shadows across the walls. In the kitchen, someone dropped a pan, the metallic clatter serving as an inadvertent exclamation point to Elena's words. The sound seemed to wake Marcus from whatever fantasy he'd been constructing about how this confrontation would end. His eyes narrowed, and his voice dropped to a more menacing register. "I'm beginning to think you don't understand the position you're in here. This isn't just about tonight's bill. It's about respect, about understanding how business really works in this city. I'm offering you one last chance to show some common sense." The leather check presenter seemed to grow heavier in Elena's hands, weighted with possibility and consequence. Around them, the restaurant continued its evening rhythm, but the undercurrent of tension was unmistakable. Whatever happened next would ripple outward, affecting not just this moment, but potentially the future of everything Elena had built. She looked once more around the dining room, at Roberto behind the bar, at Carlos near the kitchen, at all the guests who had chosen to spend their evening in this space she had created. Then she looked back at Marcus Blackwell, his face flushed with anger and entitlement, waiting for her response with the confidence of someone who had never been told no by someone he considered beneath him. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Elena's next words would determine not just the outcome of this confrontation, but would reveal something fundamental about who she really was and what Bella Vista truly represented. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders as she prepared to speak, knowing that some moments change everything, and this was undoubtedly one of them. Her mornings began at 4:30 a.m., not because the restaurant opened early, but because those quiet pre-dawn hours were the only time she could truly call her own. In the small apartment above Bella Vista, a space that most people would consider cramped but Elena viewed as perfectly sufficient, she would sit at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had grown cold while she worked through the restaurant's daily logistics. Vendor invoices spread across the worn oak surface like a paper mosaic, each one representing a choice she'd made about quality, sustainability, and supporting local businesses even when cheaper alternatives were readily available. The morning routine was sacred to Elena. She would review the previous day's numbers, not just the financial reports, but the small details that revealed the true health of her establishment. Which dishes had been returned to the kitchen, how long guests had lingered over dessert, whether the new server Maria had felt confident enough to suggest wine pairings. These nuances told a story that balance sheets couldn't capture, a narrative about whether Bella Vista was fulfilling its deeper purpose. Her coffee mug bore the logo of her alma mater, Northwestern University, where she'd earned her MBA 20 years earlier with dreams of conquering the corporate world. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now spent her days wearing an apron instead of the power suits she'd once imagined would define her professional life. But the path from those early ambitions to this moment had been neither straight nor predictable. The transition from corporate executive to restaurant owner had been neither smooth nor simple. Elena's savings, substantial though they were, had been insufficient to purchase an existing establishment in a prime location. Instead, she'd found a rundown space in the warehouse district, a former textile factory that had been sitting empty for 3 years. The building had good bones, but required massive renovation to transform it into something suitable for a restaurant. For 6 months, Elena had lived on construction sites, learning about electrical systems and plumbing, about kitchen design and health department regulations. She'd worked alongside contractors during the day and spent her evenings researching suppliers, developing recipes, and creating the vision that would eventually become Bella Vista. Her hands, once soft from desk work, became calloused from handling tools and moving equipment. The name Bella Vista had come to her during one of those long renovation days when she'd climbed to the building's second floor and looked out through the newly installed windows. The view encompassed the city skyline in the distance and the neighborhood's gradual transformation from industrial to residential. It was beautiful in an unexpected way, full of possibility and hope. Beautiful view. It seemed to capture everything she wanted the restaurant to represent. Roberto had been her first hire, a bartender whose previous job had ended when his restaurant closed during the economic downturn. He'd shown up for the interview wearing a suit that had seen better days, but carrying himself with the dignity of someone who took pride in his craft. During their conversation, he'd mentioned that he'd grown up in his family's restaurant in Mexico City, learning to mix drinks by watching his uncle work behind the bar. "I don't just make cocktails," Roberto had told her that day. "I create experiences. Every drink should tell a story, should make the person drinking it feel like they're part of something special." Elena had hired him on the spot, recognizing a kindred spirit who understood that hospitality was about more than just serving food and beverages. Carlos had joined the team a month later, a chef whose culinary school credentials were impressive, but whose real education had come from working in kitchens across the country. He'd moved to the city to be closer to his elderly mother and was looking for a place where he could implement his vision of using local ingredients to create dishes that honored both innovation and tradition. Building the team had been one of Elena's greatest challenges and deepest satisfactions. Each hire represented a leap of faith, not just on her part, but on theirs. They were betting their livelihoods on her vision, trusting that she could create something sustainable and meaningful. The responsibility had kept her awake many nights, staring at the ceiling while running through worst-case scenarios and contingency plans. The first year had been particularly brutal. Elena had worked every position in the restaurant at different times: server, host, dishwasher, prep cook, whatever was needed to keep things running when staff called in sick or when business unexpectedly picked up. Her Northwestern MBA had prepared her for many things, but not for the physical exhaustion of being on her feet for 14 hours straight or the emotional toll of dealing with difficult customers who treated restaurant workers as inferior beings. There had been moments of doubt, nights when she'd sat in her office, going through the books, and wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. The restaurant business was notoriously difficult, with thin profit margins and high failure rates. Many of her former colleagues had predicted she'd come crawling back to corporate life within 6 months, tail between her legs, and ready to admit that she'd been foolish to abandon her promising career. But there had also been moments of pure magic that reminded Elena why she'd chosen this path. The night when the elderly couple celebrating their 50th anniversary had asked her to take their picture, then insisted she sit with them while they shared stories of their courtship. The evening when the young father had brought his daughter in for her birthday and she declared the chocolate cake the best thing in the whole world. The afternoon when Giuseppe himself had stopped by unannounced and spent 2 hours in the kitchen with Carlos, sharing techniques and stories that bridged generations and cultures. These experiences had convinced Elena that she was building something worthwhile, something that mattered in ways that quarterly profit reports never could. Bella Vista wasn't just serving food. It was creating a space where people could connect with each other and with something larger than themselves. It was becoming the kind of place she'd always hoped to find, but rarely had encountered in her years of restaurant evaluations. The financial challenges never disappeared entirely. Elena still spent many mornings juggling payments to suppliers, making tough decisions about which vendors to prioritize when cash flow was tight. She'd learned to negotiate from a position of honesty rather than power, explaining to her partners why she sometimes needed extended payment terms and working collaboratively to find solutions that worked for everyone. Her relationship with money had fundamentally changed since leaving Meridian. Previously, she'd measured success by accumulation, salary increases, bonus checks, investment returns. Now, she evaluated financial health by sustainability and fairness. Could she pay her employees living wages? Could she support local suppliers even when it meant higher costs? Could she maintain quality without pricing out the customers who'd made Bella Vista part of their lives? The daily routine of running a restaurant had taught Elena lessons no business school could have provided. She'd learned to read the subtle signs that indicated how her staff was feeling. When Maria needed encouragement after a difficult customer interaction, when Carlos was frustrated with a supplier's late delivery, when Roberto was dealing with personal challenges that affected his usually sunny disposition. She'd also developed an almost supernatural ability to sense the mood of the dining room. Elena could walk through the restaurant and immediately identify which tables needed attention, which guests were celebrating something special, which couples were having difficult conversations that required extra space and discretion. This awareness had become second nature, as essential to her work as breathing. The irony of her current situation with Marcus Blackwell wasn't lost on Elena. Here was a representative of the corporate world she'd abandoned, demanding special treatment based on his position and perceived importance. His company was likely responsible for the same kind of cultural destruction she'd witnessed during her time at Meridian, the systematic replacement of authentic experiences with generic alternatives designed to maximize profit. Standing in the dining room, check presenter in hand, Elena felt the weight of every choice that had led her to this moment. The woman Marcus saw was just a waitress, someone whose opinions and dignity he could dismiss without consequence. He had no idea that she'd once sat in boardrooms making decisions that affected businesses just like the one she now owned. That she'd deliberately chosen this life because she'd discovered something more valuable than climbing corporate ladders. The confrontation playing out at table 12 represented more than just a dispute over a dinner bill. What happens next will shock you, but first, if this story inspired you to think about workplace dignity, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more true stories that prove standing up for yourself always matters. It was a collision between two different philosophies about what mattered in life, two incompatible visions of how power should be exercised and respect should be earned. Marcus operated from a worldview where status and wealth automatically conferred authority over others, where service workers existed primarily to validate his sense of superiority. Elena had once shared a similar perspective, though she'd never been as crude about expressing it. She'd certainly believed that her education and position entitled her to deference from people in service roles. The transformation of her thinking hadn't happened overnight. It had been a gradual process of recognizing the humanity and dignity in everyone she encountered, of understanding that true worth couldn't be measured by external markers of success. Now facing Marcus's increasingly aggressive demands, Elena felt the crystalline clarity that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she stood for. The nervous energy that had initially accompanied his tirade had been replaced by a calm certainty about what needed to happen next. This wasn't just about protecting herself, or even her restaurant. It was standing up for every person who had ever been treated as expendable simply because they worked in service industries. The check presenter in her hands had become a symbol of much larger than a simple transaction. It represented the choice between capitulating to bullying behavior or maintaining the principles that made Bella Vista worth preserving. Elena thought about Giuseppe, about the dignity with which he'd carried himself, even as his life's work was systematically destroyed. She thought about her employees, who trusted her to create a workplace where they were treated with respect. She thought about her customers, who came to Bella Vista because it represented something authentic in an increasingly artificial world. Marcus was still talking, his voice rising as he sensed that his usual tactics weren't producing the desired results. But Elena was no longer really hearing his words. Instead, she was listening to something deeper, the voice of her own integrity, the wisdom earned through years of difficult choices and hard-won understanding. The moment of decision was approaching, and she knew with absolute certainty what she needed to do. Marcus Blackwell's frustration had reached a boiling point, and his voice carried across the dining room with the cutting precision of someone accustomed to getting his way through intimidation. "I'm not sure you're comprehending the gravity of this situation," he said, leaning back in his chair with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never truly been challenged. "Perhaps I need to speak to your manager. Surely someone with actual authority can resolve this matter appropriately." The request sent a ripple of tension through the nearby staff members. Maria, who had been refilling water glasses at table 7, nearly dropped her pitcher. Roberto's hands stilled on the cocktail shaker he'd been preparing to use. Carlos appeared in the kitchen doorway again, his chef's coat bearing flour handprints from the bread he'd been kneading when the confrontation began. Elena felt the familiar tightening in her chest that had once preceded her most difficult business negotiations at Meridian. But this time, the sensation was accompanied by something else, a growing sense of righteous indignation at Marcus's assumption that respect was something that could only be commanded from above, never earned through actual behavior. "The manager isn't available this evening," Elena replied, her voice maintaining its professional cadence despite the storm building inside her. "However, I'm fully authorized to handle all customer service matters." Marcus's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "You're a waitress. I'm asking to speak to someone who actually runs this place, someone who understands how business works in the real world." He gestured around the dining room with proprietary confidence. "Trust me, whoever owns this establishment would much rather keep a customer like me happy than lose thousands of dollars in future business over a simple discount request." The elderly anniversary couple at table 6 had abandoned all pretense of not listening to the confrontation. The woman kept glancing nervously between Marcus and Elena, while her husband's weathered hands had formed into fists on the tablecloth. At the engagement table by the window, the newly betrothed couple had stopped taking photos, their celebration dimmed by the ugliness unfolding across the room. Brittany, Marcus's dining companion, had shrunk deeper into her seat with each escalating exchange. Her discomfort was palpable as she fidgeted with her napkin and avoided making eye contact with anyone in the restaurant. "Marcus, please," she whispered urgently. "Let's just pay the bill and go. This is becoming embarrassing." But Marcus was beyond rational discourse now, drunk on his own sense of entitlement and the audience he believed was witnessing his demonstration of power. "Embarrassing?" he snapped at Brittany. "What's embarrassing is the lack of basic customer service in this place. I eat at the finest restaurants in Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, establishments that understand how to treat their valued clientele. This is apparently not one of them." Elena's grip on the check presenter tightened, but her voice remained steady. "Mr. Blackwell, I understand you're frustrated, but raising your voice and making demands isn't going to change our policy. Every guest pays the same prices for the same exceptional food and service." "Exceptional?" Marcus's voice cracked with incredulous laughter. "You call this exceptional? I've been sitting here for 2 hours, and my steak was overcooked, the wine selection is mediocre at best, and now I'm being lectured about policy by someone whose job is to bring me my food and keep my glass full?" His eyes narrowed with malicious intent. "Maybe I should write some reviews online. Let people know what kind of experience they can really expect at this place." The threat hung in the air like a noxious cloud. Online reviews could devastate a restaurant's reputation, and everyone in the industry knew stories of establishments that had been destroyed by vindictive customers wielding the power of social media. Elena felt her staff's eyes on her, waiting to see how she would respond to this new escalation. Roberto moved closer to the bar's edge, positioning himself where he could intervene if necessary. His usual jovial expression had been replaced by something harder, more protective. In the 3 years he'd worked at Bella Vista, he'd never seen Elena back down from doing what she believed was right, even when it would have been easier to capitulate. "You're certainly entitled to share your honest experience online," Elena replied, her voice somehow managing to be both deferential and defiant. "I hope that if you do, you'll also mention that you enjoyed 3 courses, a full bottle of wine, and 2 hours of service in a clean, comfortable environment with attentive staff." Marcus's face flushed deeper red. "Don't try to spin this as a positive experience. The only thing I'll be mentioning is the inflexibility and poor attitude I encountered when I made a reasonable request for a discount that any decent establishment would have provided without question." The young server Maria had been watching the confrontation with growing distress. At 19, she was new to restaurant work and had never witnessed such aggressive behavior from a customer. Her hands shook slightly as she approached Elena's position, clearly wanting to offer support, but unsure how to help. "Elena," Maria whispered, her voice barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. "Should I call someone? The police or—" Elena shook her head almost imperceptibly, her attention still focused on Marcus. She could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he was weighing his options and looking for new pressure points to exploit. Men like Marcus were predators in expensive suits. They could sense fear and uncertainty the way sharks detected blood in water. Actually, Marcus said, his voice taking on a more sinister quality, he pulled out his iPhone with theatrical flourish. I have the personal number of someone very important in this city's restaurant licensing department. One conversation about the irregularities I've observed this evening, and this place could find itself under very intense scrutiny. The implication was clear. Comply with his demands or face regulatory harassment that could cripple the business even if no actual violations were found. It was the kind of corrupt leverage that powerful people use to coerce cooperation from those they considered beneath them. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd heard stories of businesses being destroyed by false complaints to regulatory agencies, of owners spending thousands of dollars on lawyers and lost revenue while fighting baseless accusations. The threat was particularly cruel because restaurants operated under such tight margins that even temporary shutdowns could be financially catastrophic. But as she looked around the dining room, at Roberto's supportive presence behind the bar, at Carlos's protective stance in the kitchen doorway, at Maria's wide eyes filled with concern, Elena realized that giving in to Marcus's threats would be a betrayal of everything she'd built here. These people had trusted her to create a workplace where dignity mattered more than dollars, where principles weren't negotiable commodities. "Mr. Blackwell," Elena said, her voice carrying a new quality that made several nearby diners turn their heads, "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what's really happening here." Marcus looked up from his phone with surprised satisfaction, clearly interpreting her words as capitulation. "Finally, I'm glad you're ready to be reasonable about this situation." But Elena wasn't done speaking. "You've spent the evening treating me and my staff with disrespect, making unreasonable demands, and now threatening to abuse your connections to harm our business. This isn't about money or discounts or customer service. This is about your belief that your wealth and position give you the right to treat other people as inferior." The dining room had gone completely quiet now. Even the kitchen sounds seemed muted as everyone strained to hear Elena's words. The elderly couple at table 6 was staring openly, the woman's hand clutched to her chest. The engaged couple by the window had their phones out, though whether to call for help or record the confrontation wasn't clear. Marcus's expression had shifted from smug satisfaction to dangerous anger. "How dare you speak to me that way? You're a service worker. Your job is to serve me, not lecture me about respect. Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" "I know exactly who I'm talking to," Elena replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I'm talking to someone who believes that money can buy human dignity, that threats and intimidation are acceptable tools for getting what you want, that people who work in restaurants somehow deserve less consideration than those who eat in them." The confrontation had reached a point where other diners were beginning to make their own choices about whether to stay or leave. The young family, with the daughter learning to eat spaghetti, had quietly asked for their check and were preparing to depart. But the anniversary couple remained firmly planted, the elderly man now openly glaring at Marcus with the righteous indignation of someone who'd lived through enough to recognize bullying when he saw it. Roberto had moved out from behind the bar entirely, positioning himself within easy reach of table 12. His presence was subtle but unmistakable, a reminder that Elena wasn't facing this confrontation alone. Carlos had also emerged fully from the kitchen, and several other staff members had found reasons to move closer to the dining room. "This is incredible," Marcus said, his voice rising to a near shout. I'm being attacked by the hired help for having the audacity to request basic customer service. This is exactly the kind of insubordination that destroys businesses." He waved his phone menacingly. "One call, that's all it takes. One call to the right person and this place will be shut down for health violations, tax irregularities, whatever we decide to find." The naked corruption of his threat sent a visible shudder through the staff members within earshot. Maria looked like she might cry, while Carlos's jaw was clenched so tightly that the muscles in his neck stood out like cords. Even some of the customers appeared shocked by Marcus's casual discussion of manufacturing false accusations. Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a mantle. Every person in this room was looking to her for guidance about how to respond when faced with the kind of systemic abuse of power that destroyed faith in justice and fairness. Her next words would determine not just the outcome of this confrontation, but the kind of leader she chose to be in a moment that demanded courage. The check presenter in her hands had become warm from her grip, the leather smooth and familiar beneath her fingers. Inside was a bill that represented fair payment for fair service, nothing more, nothing less. But Marcus's threats had transformed this simple transaction into something much larger, a test of whether integrity could survive in the face of institutional corruption. "You know what, Mr. Blackwell?" Elena said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. "You're absolutely right about one thing. This conversation is about knowing who you're talking to." She set the check presenter down on the table with deliberate precision, the soft sound somehow carrying more weight than Marcus's earlier shouting. Around the dining room, the atmosphere shifted palpably as everyone sensed that something fundamental was about to change. "You mentioned that you work for Meridian Holdings, Regional Vice President of Acquisitions, if I heard correctly. That's quite an impressive title." Marcus straightened in his chair, clearly pleased that Elena was finally showing what he interpreted as proper deference to his corporate position. "That's right. And if you understood what that meant—" "Oh, I understand perfectly what it means. It means you're responsible for identifying restaurants and hospitality businesses that Meridian can acquire, optimize, and ultimately strip them of everything that made them special in the first place." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His confident expression faltered as he tried to process how a waitress could possibly know the operational details of his company's business model. Around the dining room, other customers were leaning forward, sensing that the dynamic of the confrontation was shifting in ways none of them had anticipated. Elena took a step closer to the table, her posture straightening as years of executive presence reasserted themselves. "You mentioned that you work for Meridian Holdings, Regional Vice President of Acquisitions, if I heard correctly. That's quite an impressive title."
Marcus's face had gone pale beneath his earlier flush of anger. "How could you possibly know about—" "Because," Elena said, her voice now carrying the full authority of someone who had operated at the highest levels of corporate power, "I used to have your job." The revelation hit the dining room like a thunderclap. Roberto's eyes widened with sudden understanding, while Carlos's expression shifted from protective anger to amazed recognition. Even the customers who had been preparing to leave stopped mid-motion, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Marcus stared at Elena as if seeing her for the first time, his brain struggling to reconcile the uniformed waitress before him with the implications of what she'd just revealed. That's impossible. You're a server." "I was vice president of development at Meridian Holdings for 8 years. I specialized in restaurant acquisitions. I wrote the evaluation protocols your department still uses. I probably reviewed and approved half the acquisition reports that cross your desk." The transformation in Elena's demeanor was striking. Gone was the deferential service worker Marcus had been berating for the past hour. In her place stood someone who clearly understood corporate power structures, someone who spoke the language of high-stakes business negotiations with native fluency. I sat in the same meetings you attend now. I listened to the same discussions about optimization opportunities and operational efficiencies that justify destroying authentic restaurants and replacing them with soulless profit machines. I know exactly how your company operates, Mr. Blackwell, because I helped design the system you're working within. Marcus's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his usual arsenal of intimidation tactics rendered useless by this unexpected revelation. The power dynamic in the room had completely reversed. Suddenly, he was the one who felt exposed and vulnerable, while Elena radiated the confidence of someone who held all the cards. So, when you threaten to call your contacts in the licensing department, understand that I'm not some naive restaurant owner who can be bullied into submission. I know how those phone calls work. I know which officials can be pressured and which ones have integrity. I know the difference between legitimate regulatory concerns and manufactured harassment campaigns. Roberto had moved closer to the table, his expression shifting from protective concern to something approaching awe. In 3 years of working together, Elena had never fully explained her background before opening Bella Vista. He'd known she was educated and experienced, but the scope of her corporate history was a revelation that recontextualized everything he'd observed about her leadership style. More importantly, Elena said, her voice taking on an edge that made several nearby diners shiver, I know your company's current acquisition strategy because I helped develop it. I know which neighborhoods Meridian is targeting for expansion, which properties are under consideration, and which local businesses represent obstacles to your development plans. The implications of her words sent a visible shock through Marcus's system. If Elena really had the inside knowledge she claimed, she would understand not just Meridian's public business practices, but their more questionable tactics as well. The pressure campaigns against non-compliant tenants, the strategic manipulation of zoning regulations, the coordinated efforts to drive out local competitors. You're bluffing, Marcus said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. If you really worked for Meridian, you'd still be there. No one leaves that kind of position to become a waitress. Elena's smile was sharp as a knife blade. No one leaves that position to become a waitress, she agreed. But some people leave it to become restaurant owners who understand exactly how predatory corporations operate and how to protect themselves against those tactics. She gestured around the dining room with proprietary pride. This isn't my uniform, Mr. Blackwell. It's my choice. The revelation sent shockwaves through everyone within earshot. Maria's jaw had dropped completely open, while Carlos was staring at Elena with newfound respect that bordered on amazement. The elderly anniversary couple was whispering urgently to each other, clearly reevaluating everything they'd witnessed. Marcus was struggling to regain his footing in a conversation that had spun completely beyond his control. Even if what you're saying is true, he said, his voice weak with confusion, it doesn't change the fact that you're being unreasonable about a simple discount request. Unreasonable? Elena's laugh was sharp with irony. Mr. Blackwell, you've spent the evening treating me and my staff like servants, threatening to abuse your corporate connections to harm our business, and demanding special treatment based on nothing more than your inflated sense of entitlement. And you think I'm the one who's being unreasonable?
The dining room had become completely silent, except for the soft jazz playing through the sound system and the distant clatter from the kitchen. Even the young family who had been preparing to leave had stopped to listen, their daughter wide-eyed at the adult drama unfolding before her. Marcus made one last desperate attempt to reassert his authority. Fine. If you really know how Meridian operates, then you know we have the resources to make life very difficult for businesses that don't cooperate with our interests. This neighborhood is scheduled for significant development over the next 5 years. It would be unfortunate if Bella Vista found itself incompatible with those plans. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. a warning that Elena's restaurant could find itself targeted for forced closure or acquisition if she didn't demonstrate appropriate deference to Meridian's interests. It was exactly the kind of corporate extortion that had driven Elena away from her executive position in the first place. But instead of fear, Marcus's words seemed to energize Elena further. "Are you seriously threatening me with corporate retaliation because I won't give you a dinner discount?" she asked, her voice rising with incredulous anger. "Are you that petty and vindictive?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, and Marcus's face flushed red as he realized how his words must sound to the other diners. Several customers were now openly recording the confrontation on their phones, capturing his threats for posterity. "I'm not threatening anyone," Marcus said weakly. But the damage was already done. His mask of corporate respectability had slipped completely, revealing the ugly entitlement underneath. Elena leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "Mr. Blackwell, let me be very clear about something. I didn't leave Meridian Holdings because I was fired or because I couldn't handle the corporate world. I left because I discovered that success built on the destruction of authentic experiences and the exploitation of good people wasn't success at all. It was just institutionalized bullying dressed up in expensive suits." The words hit their target with devastating precision. Marcus recoiled as if he'd been physically struck, his entire worldview challenged by someone who had walked the same corporate halls he frequented but had chosen a fundamentally different path. "I built Bella Vista to be everything that Meridian's properties aren't. Authentic instead of artificial, community-focused instead of profit-obsessed, respectful of employees instead of exploitative, and successful precisely because we prioritize human dignity over quarterly earnings reports." Roberto began to applaud softly, his appreciation for Elena's words clear in his expression. Soon other customers joined in, first the elderly anniversary couple, then the engaged pair by the window, then tables throughout the dining room. The sound built gradually, becoming a wall of support for Elena's principles and a repudiation of everything Marcus represented. Marcus looked around the dining room with growing panic as he realized that public opinion had turned completely against him. The recording phones, the applauding customers, the staff members standing firmly behind Elena, all of it made clear that his usual tactics had not just failed, but backfired spectacularly. "This is insane," he muttered, reaching for his wallet with shaking hands. "I don't have to listen to this abuse." "You don't?" Elena agreed pleasantly. "You're welcome to pay your bill and leave at any time. The total is $347.50, exactly as listed on our menu, with no hidden charges and no surprise fees. Our prices are fair, our service is excellent, and our principles are non-negotiable." The final word carried the weight of absolute certainty. Marcus could sense that no amount of threats, manipulation, or corporate pressure would change Elena's position. She had revealed herself to be someone who understood his world completely, but had consciously chosen to reject its values in favor of something better. With fumbling fingers, Marcus threw several bills on the table, more than enough to cover the check, but clearly intended as an angry gesture rather than a gracious payment. He stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair in his haste to escape the humiliation of his failed power play. "This isn't over," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Elena's response was calm and confident. "Yes, Mr. Blackwell, it is." As Marcus stormed toward the exit with Brittany trailing behind, the dining room erupted in quiet applause from the other customers. The elderly anniversary couple smiled and raised their wine glasses in Elena's direction. The engaged pair by the window gave her a thumbs up, their celebration restored. Roberto approached with a clean towel and began wiping down table 12. "Well," he said with a grin, "that was something." Elena picked up the money Marcus had thrown down, exactly $347.50, no tip included. She looked around at her restaurant, her staff, her customers who had witnessed her stand up for what was right. Tomorrow there might be consequences, but tonight, dignity has won.
"Yes," she said, straightening her apron. "It certainly was something."
As Marcus Blackwell stumbled toward the exit with Brittany trailing behind him in mortified silence, the dining room at Bella Vista remained suspended in a moment of collective amazement. The applause had faded, but the energy in the room hummed with the electricity that follows any dramatic revelation of truth. Elena stood by table 12, check presenters still in hand, as the full weight of what had just transpired began to settle over everyone present. Roberto was the first to break the silence, his voice filled with wonder and respect. "Elena, in 3 years of working together, you never told me you used to be an executive at Meridian Holdings. That explains so much about how you run this place." Elena looked around the dining room, suddenly aware that every eye was focused on her. The customers who had witnessed the confrontation wore expressions ranging from amazement to admiration, while her staff members seemed to be seeing her in an entirely new light. The weight of leadership she'd carried privately for so long had suddenly become visible to everyone around her. "I didn't think it was relevant to mention," Elena said softly, though her voice carried clearly through the quiet restaurant. "What mattered was building something worth building, not talking about what I used to do." Maria approached tentatively, her young face glowing with newfound respect. "So, you really owned this place the whole time? When I applied for the job and you interviewed me while wearing an apron, you were actually the owner?" Elena nodded, a gentle smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I was making bread that day. Carlos was teaching me his grandmother's recipe for focaccia, and I didn't want to interrupt the lesson just for an interview. Besides, I wanted to see how you'd treat someone you thought was just another employee." The revelation sparked a ripple of understanding through the staff members within earshot. Elena's hands-on approach, her intimate knowledge of every aspect of the restaurant's operations, her insistence on treating all positions with equal respect, it all made perfect sense now that they understood her true role. Carlos emerged fully from the kitchen, his chef's coat flour-dusted and his expression filled with amazement. "That first day when you worked prep with me for 6 hours straight, learning every station, I thought you were just really dedicated to understanding the kitchen. You were learning your own restaurant." "I was learning from the best," Elena replied, her voice warm with genuine affection for her head chef. "You've taught me more about food and hospitality than any business school ever could. Every day I spend in this restaurant, I learn something new about what it means to create genuine experiences for people." The elderly anniversary couple had been listening to this exchange with fascination, and now the man stood slowly and approached Elena with his wife's hand clasped firmly in his own. His weathered face bore the lines of someone who had lived through enough decades to recognize character when he saw it. "Young lady," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone whose opinions had been earned through experience, "what you just did was remarkable. I've been married to this beautiful woman for 50 years, and in all that time, I've rarely seen someone stand up to a bully with such dignity and strength." His wife nodded emphatically, her eyes bright with tears of appreciation. "When that awful man started shouting, I was afraid. People like that, they make you feel small and powerless. But watching you reminded me that we don't have to accept being treated badly, no matter who's doing the treating." Elena felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the restaurant's ambient temperature. "Thank you," she said simply. "But I couldn't have done it alone. Everyone here, Roberto, Carlos, Maria, all our staff, they had my back. That's what makes this place special. We support each other." The engaged couple by the window had approached as well, their earlier joy now mixed with something deeper, a recognition that they had witnessed something important. The young man spoke first, his voice filled with earnest admiration. "We wanted to thank you for not letting that guy ruin our evening. This was supposed to be one of the most important nights of our lives, and when he started yelling, he gestured helplessly, unable to find words for the disappointment he'd felt. His fiancée squeezed his hand and addressed Elena directly. "You turned what could have been a horrible memory into something inspiring.
20 years from now, when we tell our children about the night we got engaged, we'll tell them about the brave restaurant owner who stood up to a bully and reminded everyone that dignity matters more than money." The words hit Elena with unexpected force. She had been thinking about the confrontation in terms of business principles and personal integrity, but these young people had helped her see the broader implications. Every person in the restaurant tonight would carry this story with them, and it would shape how they thought about courage, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right.
Each conversation revealed new layers of meaning in what had transpired. Elena realized that her confrontation with Marcus had resonated with people on a deeply personal level, because everyone had experienced moments when they felt powerless in the face of institutional authority or personal aggression. Her refusal to be intimidated had given them permission to believe that resistance was possible. Roberto moved through the crowd of customers and staff members gathering around Elena, his bartender's instincts telling him that this moment needed to be marked properly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who had witnessed something extraordinary, "I think this calls for a toast." He began pouring glasses of Prosecco, moving with the fluid efficiency of someone who had served thousands of customers but understood that this moment was unique. As he worked, he spoke to the assembled crowd about his experience working with Elena, painting a picture of leadership that went far beyond what anyone had previously understood. "For 3 years, I've watched Elena work harder than anyone else in this restaurant," Roberto said as he distributed glasses. "She's here before any of us arrive and leaves after we've all gone home. She knows every supplier personally, remembers every customer's preferences, and has never asked any of us to do something she wouldn't do herself." Carlos nodded vigorously, adding his own perspective. "She's worked every position in this kitchen: prep cook, line cook, dishwasher. She's done it all. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to understand what each job required. That's not normal for owners. That's leadership." Maria spoke up from her position near the bar, her voice still filled with wonder at the evening's revelations. "She spent 2 weeks training me when I started, even though I was just a part-time server. She made sure I understood not just how to do the job, but why it mattered. She taught me that serving people isn't just about bringing food, it's about creating moments of happiness." The stories continued as other staff members shared their experience working under Elena's leadership. Each account revealed new facets of her character: her willingness to cover shifts when employees had family emergencies, her insistence on paying above-market wages even when the budget was tight, her practice of sharing profits with the entire team during successful months. Elena listened to these testimonials with growing amazement, realizing that her employees had been paying attention to details she'd thought were going unnoticed. The small gestures she'd considered basic human decency, remembering a server's birthday, asking about a cook's sick child, ensuring everyone had health insurance, had been building a foundation of loyalty and respect that went far beyond typical workplace relationships. "The thing about Elena," Roberto continued as he raised his glass, "is that she never made us feel like employees. She made us feel like partners in something important. This restaurant isn't just her business, it's our shared mission to create something beautiful in the world." The toast that followed was unlike anything Elena had ever experienced. Customers and staff members raised their glasses together, their faces glowing with the satisfaction of having witnessed justice prevail over intimidation. The boundaries between server and served had dissolved in the face of shared values and mutual respect. As the crowd began to disperse and normal dinner service resumed, Elena found herself in a series of individual conversations that revealed the depth of impact her revelation had created. The anniversary couple insisted on sharing stories of their own experiences with workplace bullying,
expressing how Elena's courage had reminded them of their own capacity for resistance. The newly engaged couple asked to take a photo with Elena, wanting to preserve this moment as part of their engagement story. This restaurant will always be special to us now, not just because it's where we got engaged, but because it's where we learned what real strength looks like. The family with the young daughter who had been learning to eat spaghetti had returned to their table, the parents explaining to their child in age-appropriate terms that sometimes adults need to stand up to other adults who are being mean. The little girl's wide-eyed attention to this lesson reminded Elena that children were always watching, always learning about how the world worked based on what they witnessed from the adults around them. The businessman who had been dining alone approached Elena during a quieter moment, his expression serious but appreciative. "I run a small consulting firm, and I've seen too many good people destroyed by corporate bullies like that guy. What you did tonight, it gives me hope that there are still places where integrity matters more than influence." Elena found herself deeply moved by these responses, realizing that her decision to confront Marcus had created ripple effects she never could have anticipated. Each person who had witnessed the confrontation would carry the memory with them, and some would undoubtedly find the courage to stand up in their own difficult moments because they had seen it was possible. As the evening progressed and normal dinner service resumed, Elena noticed subtle changes in how her staff carried themselves. Maria moved with more confidence, her posture straighter and her interactions with customers more assured. Carlos commanded his kitchen with additional authority, clearly emboldened by understanding the full scope of the operation he helped lead.
Roberto orchestrated the bar service with even greater pride than usual, occasionally catching Elena's eye and sharing a knowing smile that acknowledged the deepened trust between them. The entire team seemed energized by the revelation of Elena's background and the demonstration of how their shared values could triumph over external pressure. The restaurant's atmosphere had transformed as well. Customers lingered longer over their meals, engaged in more animated conversations, and treated the staff with even greater respect than usual. Word of the confrontation had begun to spread through social media, with several diners posting about their experience witnessing corporate entitlement get destroyed by restaurant owner who used to work in corporate America. Elena realized that this single evening had fundamentally changed Bella Vista's identity in the community. What had been known as an excellent neighborhood restaurant was now being recognized as something more, a place where principles mattered, where dignity was defended, where authentic values created real consequences for bad behavior. The implications extended beyond just one-night service. Elena understood that Marcus Blackwell's threats about Meridian Holdings' development plans in the neighborhood were likely genuine, which meant that Bella Vista might face increased pressure in the coming months and years. But tonight had proven that she wasn't fighting that battle alone. She had allies in her staff, her customers, and the broader community that valued what she had created. As the last customers of the evening settled their bills and prepared to leave, many stopped to thank Elena personally for what they had witnessed. Some shared their own stories of workplace harassment or corporate intimidation, expressing gratitude for seeing someone successfully resist such pressure. Others simply wanted to shake her hand and express their respect for her leadership. The final group to leave was the anniversary couple, who had spent the entire evening at their table, clearly reluctant to end what had become a memorable night for them for reasons they never could have expected. As they gathered their belongings, the elderly gentleman approached Elena one final time. "Young lady," he said, his voice filled with the weight of decades of experience, "you reminded me tonight of something I'd almost forgotten. Power isn't about position or money or threats. It's about knowing who you are and what you stand for, and being willing to defend those things when it matters most." His wife nodded in agreement, then surprised Elena by reaching out to clasp her hands warmly. "We'll be back next week for dinner, not just because the food is excellent, but because this is clearly a place where good things happen." As the couple made their way to the exit, Elena felt the profound satisfaction that came from knowing she had made the right choice in the most difficult moment. The confrontation with Marcus had revealed not just her own character, but the character of everyone around her. Staff members who stood loyally by her side, customers who refused to accept bullying behavior, and a community that valued integrity over intimidation. The evening's revelations had transformed relationships throughout the restaurant, creating deeper bonds based on shared understanding and mutual respect. Elena's secret was out, but rather than diminishing her authority, the truth had enhanced it by demonstrating that her leadership was rooted in experience, principle, and genuine care for the people around her. Word of the incident had spread through social media like wildfire, with videos recorded by customers during the confrontation going viral across multiple platforms. The hashtag BellaVistaOwner began trending locally, accompanied by stories, commentary, and overwhelming support for Elena's principled stand against corporate bullying. By Tuesday morning, 3 days after the incident, Elena's phone was ringing constantly with interview requests from local news stations, food bloggers, and business publications. The story had captured public imagination because it represented something people rarely saw: genuine consequences for entitled behavior, delivered by someone who understood the corporate world from the inside but had chosen a different path. Elena sat in her office above the restaurant, looking down at the dining room where morning prep was underway. The space looked the same as always: Carlos directing his kitchen staff through their daily routines, Roberto organizing the bar setup, Maria arranging fresh flowers in small vases for each table. But the energy was different, charged with new purpose and confidence. Her laptop screen displayed dozens of messages from supporters, potential investors, and job seekers who wanted to be part of what Bella Vista represented. There were also less pleasant communications: angry emails from Meridian Holdings' legal department, threatening messages from corporate executives who saw Elena's story as an attack on business authority, and warnings about potential retaliation. But for every negative message, there were 20 positive ones. Former Meridian employees reached out to share their own stories of ethical conflicts within the company. Restaurant owners from across the country expressed solidarity and shared their own experiences with entitled customers and corporate pressure. Food service workers sent messages of gratitude for someone finally standing up to the kinds of abuse they face regularly. The most meaningful correspondence came from Giuseppe, the elderly Italian restaurant owner whose establishment had been destroyed during Elena's time at Meridian. His handwritten letter, delivered by his grandson, brought tears to Elena's eyes as she read his words of forgiveness and admiration.
"Elena," the letter read in careful English, "when my restaurant was taken from me, I thought it was the end of everything I had built. But now I see that sometimes good things must be torn down so that better things can be built in their place. You took the knowledge you gained from that experience and used it to create something beautiful. That gives meaning to my loss and hope for the future." Roberto knocked on the office door, interrupting Elena's reading. "There's someone downstairs who wants to meet you," he said, his expression mixing curiosity with concern. "She says she's a reporter from the Tribune, but she seems different from the others." Elena made her way downstairs to find a woman in her 50s sitting at table 6, the same spot where the anniversary couple had witnessed the confrontation. The journalist had graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and wore the kind of practical clothing that suggested she was more interested in substance than style. "Miss Martinez," the woman said, rising to shake Elena's hand, "I'm Sarah Chen from the Chicago Tribune. I've been covering corporate accountability stories for 15 years, and what happened here has implications that go far beyond restaurant service." Elena gestured for Sarah to sit back down, curious about this different approach. Most of the media attention had focused on the dramatic confrontation itself, treating it as entertainment rather than examining the deeper issues involved. "I've been investigating Meridian Holdings for 3 years," Sarah continued, pulling out a digital recorder with Elena's permission. "Their practices in neighborhood development, the pressure they put on local businesses, the way they manipulate zoning and licensing regulations, it's a pattern of behavior that affects entire communities." The conversation that followed revealed the broader context Elena had suspected but never fully understood. Sarah shared documentation of Meridian's systematic approach to gentrification, their use of regulatory harassment against non-compliant businesses, and their pattern of acquiring properties at below-market prices after creating financial pressure on owners. Marcus Blackwell isn't just some entitled customer. He's part of a coordinated effort to identify and target businesses that might resist Meridian's development plans. His behavior at your restaurant was probably part of building a case for why this establishment shouldn't be allowed to renew its lease when the time comes. Elena felt a chill of recognition. The building that housed Bella Vista was owned by a holding company she'd never researched thoroughly, but she now realized it might be connected to Meridian's broader property portfolio. Her confrontation with Marcus wasn't personal, it was professional, part of a campaign to either force her compliance or create justification for removing her entirely. "The good news," Sarah continued, "is that your public stand has created a paper trail that will make it much harder for them to pursue their usual tactics. When a corporate vice president threatens regulatory retaliation and it's captured on video, that becomes evidence of corruption rather than just business as usual." The interview continued for over an hour, with Sarah asking detailed questions about Elena's experience at Meridian and her observations about how the company operated. Elena found herself sharing information she'd kept confidential for years, realizing that her insider knowledge could help protect other business owners from similar pressure campaigns. When Sarah left, Elena felt simultaneously empowered and burdened by the knowledge that her restaurant had become a symbol in a much larger fight. The customers who had applauded her stand against Marcus hadn't just been supporting one woman's dignity. They had been cheering for resistance against systematic corporate abuse. The lunch service that day brought an unusual crowd to Bella Vista. Many customers mentioned they had come specifically because of the viral videos, wanting to support a business that had stood up for its principles. But Elena was pleased to see that the newcomers seemed genuinely impressed by the food and service, suggesting that the publicity might create lasting relationships rather than just temporary curiosity. During the afternoon lull, Elena gathered her core staff for a meeting she'd been planning since the incident. Roberto, Carlos, and Maria sat around table 12, the epicenter of the confrontation, while Elena shared what she had learned from Sarah Chen and discussed the potential implications for their future. "I need you all to understand that what happened the other night might have consequences beyond what we initially realized. There's a possibility that Meridian Holdings will try to pressure our landlord or create other difficulties for the restaurant. I want everyone to know what we might be facing." Carlos leaned forward, his expression serious but determined. "Elena, 3 years ago, you gave me a chance to cook the food I believed in using ingredients I could be proud of. Whatever pressure they try to bring, we'll face it together." Maria nodded emphatically. "You taught me that this job isn't just about serving food. You showed me that we're creating experiences that matter to people. I'm not going anywhere, no matter what some corporate bullies try to do." Roberto's response was characteristically practical. "So what do? How do we protect what we built here?" Elena had been thinking about this question since her conversation with Sarah Chen. "First, we document everything. Every interaction with landlords, licensing officials, inspectors, anything that seems unusual or pressured. Second, we strengthen our relationships with customers and the community so that any retaliation becomes visible to people who care about what happens to us."
She paused, looking around at the faces of people who had become far more than employees. They were partners in a mission that transcended simple business success. But most importantly, we continue doing exactly what we've been doing. We serve excellent food, we treat everyone with respect, and we never compromise our principles for the sake of convenience or profit. Over the following weeks, Bella Vista became more than just a restaurant. It became a symbol of resistance against corporate bullying and a model for how businesses could operate with integrity. Elena hired Marco and 2 other young cooks who wanted to learn from an establishment that prioritized values over profit margins. The media attention eventually died down, but the fundamental changes remained. Customer loyalty deepened, staff pride increased, and the restaurant's reputation attracted people who understood that they were supporting more than just excellent food. They were investing in a vision of how hospitality could honor human dignity. Meridian Holdings did attempt some pressure tactics, but the public scrutiny generated by the viral videos made their usual methods ineffective. Sarah Chen's investigative reporting exposed their systematic harassment of local businesses, leading to regulatory changes that protected other establishments from similar treatment. Elena never heard from Marcus Blackwell again, but she occasionally saw news about Meridian's corporate restructuring and the departure of several executives amid ethics investigations. She felt no satisfaction in anyone's professional downfall, only relief that future business owners might face less pressure to compromise their principles. 6 months after the confrontation, Elena was featured in a Harvard Business Review article about authentic leadership in the service industry. The piece examined how her corporate background had informed her approach to restaurant ownership and how standing up to entitled behavior had strengthened rather than damaged her business. The anniversary couple became regular customers, often bringing friends and family members to experience what they called the restaurant where dignity matters. The engaged couple held their wedding reception at Bella Vista, with Elena personally ensuring that every detail reflected their values of respect and authenticity. Giuseppe visited monthly, sharing stories and techniques with the kitchen staff while marveling at how Elena had created something that honored the traditions he'd fought to preserve. His presence provided a living link between the restaurant's mission and the broader history of hospitality as an expression of human care. Elena Martinez, a former corporate executive turned restaurant owner, confronts an entitled customer named Marcus Blackwell at her establishment, Bella Vista. When Blackwell demands an undeserved discount and treats her staff disrespectfully, Elena refuses and asks him to leave. The confrontation is recorded by another customer and goes viral, sparking a nationwide conversation about workplace dignity and standing up to corporate bullying. The incident transforms both Elena's life and the broader service industry. Bella Vista expands significantly, becoming a model for ethical business practices with profit-sharing programs and community investment. Elena's staff members, Roberto, Carlos, and Maria, all advance in their careers, supported by her mentorship philosophy of treating employees as partners rather than subordinates. The viral video has far-reaching consequences. Elena becomes a sought-after speaker, writes best-selling books about authentic leadership, and establishes foundations supporting service workers. Her story inspires legislative changes protecting employees from harassment and creates a movement for workplace dignity across multiple industries. Meanwhile, Marcus Blackwell faces professional consequences, losing his corporate position and struggling to find similar work. Years later, his daughter Jennifer visits Elena to apologize for her father's behavior and shares how the incident changed her own perspective on treating service workers. Marcus himself eventually writes a letter of genuine remorse, acknowledging the harm he caused. 25 years later, Elena Martinez has become a national advocate for workplace dignity, testifying before Congress and helping pass legislation protecting service workers. Bella Vista, now a community institution, features Table 12 with a brass plaque reading, "Where silence is never forgotten," a permanent reminder that individual courage can inspire collective change. The story demonstrates how one moment of principled resistance can create lasting social impact, proving that businesses can thrive while prioritizing human dignity over profit, and that speaking truth to power requires constant vigilance and courage.